Hello, everyone, and welcome to Walking Through the Bible. Sometimes when friends correct friends, but it is true really of anyone, offense can be taken. Job spent chapters 16 and 17 chastising his friends for their lack of sympathy, for his plight, and wished that they had just simply kept their mouths shut, rather than torment him further. Well, that sort of talk rubbed Bildad the wrong way, which leads to his second speech here in Job 18. Let's read the first section to learn what Bildad has to say. So if you have a Bible with you, you can turn to the book of Job to chapter 18. We're going to read from verses 1 to 4. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Job chapter 18, beginning of verse 1. Then Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, How long till you put an end to words? Gain understanding, and afterward we will speak. Why are we counted as beasts and regarded as stupid in your sight? You who tear yourself in anger, shall the earth be forsaken for you, or shall the rock be removed from its place? Job and his friends have been going back and forth trying to explain the causes of Job's suffering. Job's friends take the view that Job is suffering due to his personal sin, so his suffering is a form of chastisement by God. It should therefore be accepted by Job. He should repent of his sin, and then the suffering would be removed. He would be returned to his former wealth and prosperity, maybe even be allowed to have more children. Job, however, didn't see things that way. He didn't believe he was a sinner, but rather viewed his suffering as coming from God for some other reason unknown to him, with God being able to do as he will. Job is not necessarily arguing with God's power to act. He just wished that God would allow him to die so that his suffering would be over. Unbeknownst to both groups is that they were both wrong. And at the root of their error was the notion that all suffering comes from God. While it is true that suffering from our own sins can be a form of chastisement by God, not all suffering is because of our own personal sin, but simply a result of living in a sinful world. Both the righteous and the wicked can suffer, and the righteous can even suffer for being righteous. We, of course, know that Job was suffering for being righteous, but at the hands of Satan, not at the hands of God. This incorrect theology led to the lack of compassion on the part of Job's friends, and it did lead to a sort of arrogance on the part of Job. With Eliphaz's speech now over and Job's response to it, it is now Bildad's turn to give his second speech. What did Bildad have to say? He basically said, Job, when will you shut up? He calls on Job to think a little before speaking, and perhaps he wouldn't be so long-winded in his answers. In other words, Bildad had had enough. He was tired of being counted as beasts, poor comforters, and one without wisdom or understanding. Bildad and the rest of them were pointing to the wisdom of those who came before. He likely had his own wisdom to draw upon and did not appreciate that wisdom being discarded simply because Job disagreed with it. And to some extent, I can understand Bildad's argument, for sometimes we do give short shrift to the wisdom of those who came before simply because that wisdom is old. I don't know how many times I've heard young people call today's elderly boomers as a derogatory statement meant to convey something that is out of touch with modern society and therefore something to be disregarded. But we throw away the experience of the old at our own peril, for there is nothing new under the sun. History repeats itself for those who don't learn from it, or at least it rhymes. I remember as a young person that I thought that those who were older had no clue what they were talking about on certain things, only to find out that as I got older, that not only were they right, but if I had heeded their advice, I wouldn't have wound up in some of the situations that I did. So Job, if he was simply discounting the advice of his friends because they drew on the wisdom of the elders, or simply because he disagreed with it, was not something that Job should have done. However, we also need to examine the wisdom of those who came before to ensure that it is in fact sound wisdom. People are not infallible, even the elders. What might sound like sage advice might actually be foolish. Bildad truly believed that suffering is a sign of a person's sin and that blessings were a sign of righteousness. What then of Abel, who was absolutely righteous, yet suffered death not because of his own sin, but because of Cain's sin? What then of the wicked of the world, who always seem to be blessed with riches and power, even if later they end up suffering ruin, either physically or spiritually? Nebuchadnezzar was a wicked man when he sacked Jerusalem, and yet he was very wealthy. This is where Bildad's theology was wrong, and that is why Job rejected it. That Bildad was upset with that is to be expected, for he told Job that he shouldn't expect the earth to be shaken for him, or the rocks to be moved from its place, meaning that these things wouldn't simply be altered in order to meet Job's wishes or to suit his case. Bildad believed that Job shouldn't be arguing with God about his plight, which was true. He should be mad at himself because of his sin, which was false in this case. So what we see here is a frustrated Bildad, for Job seems to be rejecting the obvious and doing so stubbornly. We'll get into the content of Bildad's utter denunciation of Job and his position, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Job chapter 18, verses 5 to 21, as we continue our work through the Bible, one verse at a time. We thank you for watching Walking Through the Bible today. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. But if you like this video, we ask that you consider subscribing to our channel so you won't miss out on other videos in our series, as well as share this video among your friends so that the saving message of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.